Welcome to the Roundtable. I am Janelle Persaud. This week we're talking about decriminalizing sex work and the efforts to so do by the various organizations. Today I'm joined by Miriam Edwards of the Guyana Sex Work Coalition, Mr. Joel Simpson from SASOD, and Quincy McEwan from the Guyana Trans United. Welcome, guys, to the Roundtable.
Thank you.
All right. So we've seen the efforts in the media of trying to do this. Let's learn a little bit more about it, and we start with Miriam. Tell me about the efforts to decriminalize sex work, because we've had a little chat before, and you talk about how this has been affecting those involved in the trade. Just tell me a little bit about the efforts in your part.
The efforts, some of the things we're trying to do is do a lot of media, get a lot of media work out there so that people can understand that sex workers facing a lot of issues and sex work is work.
Yeah.
We want people to understand that it's a job, it's a profession that you choose as an adult. And so we need people to understand clearly, and because the Guyana Sex Worker Coalition have zero tolerance for child sex, children in sex work, and zero tolerance for persons being trafficked, we want people to understand that it's an adult thing. This is your choice, and you must be free to have your choice. If I choose to be a sex worker, I must be treated equally like everybody else. So that's what we want people. So we're fighting for that. And without we have it being decriminalized, then we'll have a lot of issues.
Joel, what are the things that would be necessary? What are the things that we need to put in place as a country to ensure that this is done correctly in your perspective?
In terms of, SASOD works on this from maybe like two key angles. SASOD was involved as a founding partner in the Guyana Sex Work Coalition, the sex worker-led organization which Miriam is the executive director for. And we also work on transgender issues, particularly laws criminalizing cross-dressing, which disproportionately affect transgender sex workers. Quincy could tell you a little bit more about that and the work that Guyana Trans United is doing in that regard. In terms of the legal scenario, we have offenses in which criminalize activities in the sex industry. So actual solicitation is not a crime, but it is a crime to live off the earnings, quote unquote, live off the earnings of prostitution. It is a crime to run a brothel, and so on and so on. So what that does is it creates an unsafe work environment for sex workers.
Yeah.
Because if you work in the sex industry and everywhere that you go and everybody that you interact with face criminal offenses, then it makes it difficult for you to work safely. So what the organizations are advocating for is regulation. We're talking about decriminalizing offenses around sex work so that sex workers can have a safe working environment. So they're not more exposed to violence and discrimination at the hands of their clients, and that violence and discrimination is not further perpetrated by police, by law enforcement officers when they go to report these incidents, because there are all of these offenses around sex work. It's already socially stigmatized. But the legal exclusion also perpetuates the discrimination and the unsafe environment that sex workers face. So I think what needs to happen is these offenses need to be decriminalized so that sex workers can access all of their rights freely, and they could face less violence and discrimination. And then we could begin to regulate the sex industry so that I think once people understand the benefits and so on, they would be willing to make their contribution as self-employed persons to whatever taxes they need to pay, benefit from NIS and these sorts of things and so on, as self-employed people, because sex work is as a self-employed adult profession. But unless we unless we tackle all of that, all of the infrastructural issues in terms of the legal environment and structural and policy environment, then it becomes difficult to do all of that.
Do you think, Quincy, that once those regulations are changed, and that, as it relates to cross-dressing too, would help to remove the stigma and discrimination?
I think in some way or the other, yes, it's a positive move to have laws to remove any laws that criminalize consensual adults. I think your body, it's your business. What you want to do with your body, it's right. If we to look back to criminalizing sex work now, well, then we should have criticized even the Bible, because when we looked at the famous way named Solomon had so many wives and concubines. The woman at the well, the woman did with the issue, and when they were criticizing and about to condemn, and it was a prostitute. So we said in this modern days in this society, people has the right to the freedom of their body of expression. And gender norm should not be taken away for the personal lifestyle. If whatever life you choose to live, you're free adults. I feel you know that whatever you impact on your society and the work that you were able to earn to do, because of living to survive, we living in a world of survivors as the fittest. Sometimes because you don't have a proper education or you didn't have upbringing along school along line, you're forced to do the job that even were able to give you a salary to the end of the day. And it's more difficult when you come from a trans perspective, because even though that you're trans and there's no job really in this country really for trans people to be feel comfortable living within their body, and to go out there and to have a job and feel discriminated at every level that you go to seek employment, well then the only alternative is to survive, and to have survival for trans people, most are likely of them turn to become sex workers.
So this basically we've understood that for any person involved in the sex trade, we would need to, for that any of them to survive, then we would need change. For change to happen, we need the policymakers to first implement that change. And I am not sure, because of the moral makeup of a society, it's going to be quite difficult for a policymaker who needs votes as well to say we're going to do this. Perhaps I'm thinking that they would need to consult with people and that sort of thing. Tell me, Miriam, about your efforts to convince policymakers. What has your organization been doing to convince the policymakers to say, hey, this is something that we need done because we are affected, our lives are affected?
Presently, we're training sex workers themselves, instead of having people to speak for them, to speak to policymakers. We're hoping to get at least, even if it's 2 ministers in 2014, to listen to us, to have a sit-in in Parliament or wherever we can, to listen to us, to hear our views and not what people is saying about us. So over the years, we've been preparing people for this moment, because a lot of people still scared to come forward. So we're preparing people for this moment.
What kind of training do they go through?
In terms of your human rights, this is the first thing we have to start with, the human rights, because it's our right as a human being to know what we want for ourselves, our freedom. We need our freedom to do what we want. And when you say that sex work is you could be criminalized because of sex work, or you're a bad person and you're trying to take away my rights as a human being. Because if you choose to be a teacher, that's your profession. And I choose to be a sex worker because I don't have the qualification or the education like you, and this is what pay me to take care of my children. And you're going to tell me that persons who are living off of the earning of a sex worker could be charged, then you got to charge my children, I got to take care of. You got to, my family, my mother sick and I can't look. She don't have a job, and they're all living off of my earning as a sex worker. You're taking away my rights. And as a sex worker, you need your rights as a human being. So we're doing a lot of advocacy work in human rights. And partnering with SASOD and the Trans United, we're going to have one voice and come together and stand up for our rights, because somehow they have to listen to us.
All right, Joel, I want you to continue from what she has said because I want to get an answer as to how specifically we're targeting policymakers.
Well, for SASOD, we've been doing a lot of research and writing around intersectional human rights issues, particularly how this affects trans sex workers. Because as you know, SASOD works particularly on combating discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And we're finding that because of the criminalization of cross-dressing, because of offenses in sex work, transgender sex workers are disproportionately affected. So we're coming at it from that kind of intersectional perspective. So we've been doing some research, we've been writing policy briefs over the years, engaging with international bodies like the Global Commission on HIV and the Law.
Yes.
I can remember a couple of years ago we submitted some briefs to them, which have been compiled, and global best practices have been released. And we're working with partners like United Nations bodies to engage government as well, to understand these issues also.
All right, Quincy, you want to share some of your experiences because you talked about the discrimination and not finding work. And in our chat moments ago, Joe, we talked about some of the underlying problems of poverty and that sort of thing, and generally not being able to finish school. You want to talk a little bit about your experiences that you've had?
My personal experience as a director or leader for an organization, which actually the majority of our mandate is to serve trans people. Never mind, unless we work with other affected population. Well, our main focus is to work with trans people. Some challenge that trans people face is to know that the early coming up of them, they've been bullied most of the time because they realize that you're in a setting of a school setting, and because of our society, they only accept two gender, male or female. And because you might be tends to be in a different gender within the two group, sometimes you fall below the level and you always have the stigma. And it's very much difficult at time. It becomes sometimes so depressing. Sometimes you came out from school one day, you don't even want it to know if you wanted to go back the next day back to school. And because of your parents, sometimes it's another bully to get you back there to school on the other day. Because you don't have much friends, especially male friends. The teacher sometimes not knowing how to deal with a trans person. They sometimes you feel so many discrimination within the settings. You go to church, the church sometimes preach about male and female. You're only there because your parents bring you up that way and you go in the school the church, so you have to go to church. And the message sometimes being put over, sometimes that's not the message you wanted to hear from a pastor. It becomes so hard. You're in the community that you're born and grew in, and your relative or someone of friends or neighbors or in the community don't allow their children to associate among you because sometimes or some feelings that they feel that you're less of a human being from other persons, and you have to grow with all those stigmas attached to you. And when you became an adult now and to do things on your own, even the little knowledge that you has gained or bully yourself to become who you are in society, it's the pride. You actually be deprived because sometimes people willing to accept you to work. They take you out for the first day, but because of your lifestyle, if you're too loud, if you're a simple gay person or a simple gay man, perhaps you might get a job, but because the loudness of trans people, they feel that okay, you're gonna bring too much of attention to the business.
Could I ask you something though? This is a matter of curiosity. Is there a particular reason why that is so in terms of that loud? Because you talked about loud and is there a particular reason?
There's not a particular reason. I
Or
feel
maybe
your
it's
body language. It's the way you...
is it some sort of defense mechanism perhaps to how people treat you? I'm trying to understand.
I think because they're in a culture society, and more because people grow in this culture society, they believe of what their church tell them, what the Bible tell them, the religious perspective of them. So they would see you now because you're a trans person, you being yourself, you're more ladylike. If you're a male to female trans, you're more ladylike, and the people feel okay. Well, I'm gonna associate myself with a normal gay person because nobody knows his lifestyle because he on the down low. But to being a trans person, you're always visible. And because of your visibility and the way you carry yourself, sometimes you're always being pushed on to remain below.
So I think what Quincy was getting at when he said loud, I think it was about gender expression, right?
Expression.
Okay.
So trans people are often very visible because people can see from that there's a certain transition in their dress and so on, that this might be somebody who was born
It's a
biologically,
matter of attitude too, isn't
right,
it?
biologically male, and they're seeing this person in a bright colored wig with, hair with highlights, short dress or whatever, and that sort of thing. So I think with that, trans people can't quote unquote pass or hide like maybe
normal
lesbian, bisexual, or gay people, or like some of us can, right?
Yeah.
So that brings with it a certain extra layer of discrimination that trans people particularly face.
All right. Quincy was just talking about his experiences, and you related one earlier where, by virtue of just saying that you were associated with the Coalition of Sex Workers, that you yourself have faced discrimination. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I had an incident where I myself, because our organization always have complaints where sex workers would come and say, well, we went to the station and, we report this matter. One matter was even reported where this young lady who used to be at a brothel and the police officers in the area there knew her, and she got raped by a client, by somebody who knew her from there. And she went to the station and reported, and the police told her, you was the cause of this we used to use everybody, and they didn't take her report seriously, So we have constant reports about people going and reporting matters and being discriminated, and even some of the police officers want sex from the person before free sex. This is your job, right? You're supposed to get paid for it, but they want free sex if they want to take up your matter. And then if you don't want to give them free sex, then they don't listen to you. It's a big issue. And I myself faced discrimination from the police as late as October the 21st last year, 2013, where I had a matter in New Amsterdam. I had to go to the police station, and the person who was giving the complaint was there, and I was standing there. And the police asked me, where do you work? I said, Guyana Sex Work Coalition. And she said to me, sit on the bench. And then she looked, she see some people dressed who came with me at the station looking like they're sex workers. She's not sure if they're sex workers. I don't want y'all in here. And send them out to the station. And the person that was giving the complaint, mother, was sitting right there. And her son, and they didn't send them out. But because these people was dressed differently, they sent them out. And she took the statement from her and didn't listen to me. She just said, well, I'm going to charge you and you will have to go to court, because I said that I'm the executive director for Guyana Sex Work Coalition. But she looked at me different when I said Guyana Sex Work Coalition. So that's why I make it clear that we don't promote sex work. We fight for the rights of the population.
But Joel, this would demand much more than policy change, because this is a cultural issue.
Right,
You're telling a society that sees these things. Well, sometimes I find our society quite hypocritical, but I'm not going to get there. But the thing is, you're coming to society that says that these things are completely wrong, and for our government to implement it. So this would really demand much more than policy change.
No doubt, and that's why the organizations are working at multiple levels. Our engagement with media, as this example shows today, is also a big part of the effort, because we also need to educate people. We need to educate everyday people at the community level. Sex workers often face discrimination and violence from people in the communities where they live. So that's an issue as well. And we have to realize too that our police officers, our healthcare workers, our teachers, and all these professionals come from the same communities that we live into. So they come with these prejudices and biases and so on. So education, public education, is very important for creating social change, for reducing the stigma and discrimination. A lot of the work that Guyana Sex Work Coalition does is targeted at certain state bodies which are supposed to provide non-discriminatory service to all its citizens. So you would expect that the police would be trained and sensitized to provide those services to everybody. Same for healthcare workers. Same as well for teachers. Quincy spoke about experiences with schools and school administration and so on, and how oftentimes for trans people they face bullying, discrimination, and sometimes that's reinforced by either a lack of interest to deal with it by teachers and school administration. Sometimes they perpetuate it as well because they are transphobic teachers and school administrators in the system and so on. So there's a great deal of work to do in terms of public education and educating state bodies, state agencies, which are supposed to be providing non-discriminatory service to all of us.
And if I could step in right here, we're also doing education, sensitization with police officers, like the soldiers, and also
And
healthcare
they're coming on board.
providers.
What is the response like?
Within our organization, we have sensitization sessions with these persons. In some areas, we've seen slight change, little change, but we're getting there, and we hope that we can do more sensitization in terms of them getting to understand the population, not only about sex workers, about also about understanding transgender people who face a lot of issues and a lot of challenges when they visit these entities. So we're doing educational programs with these organizations, these different entities, in terms of sensitizing them on the whole LGBT community and sex work community, because these are the people who are facing the biggest stigma.
You talk about having a non-tolerance for children involved in sex work, and there's a comment about once these or their laws to support the activity, then it will make it easier for a young person to say, well, perhaps I want to get involved, or I want to do this. Respond to that. I'll give you all a chance to if you want.
Yeah, I totally disagree with that sentiment. One is, I think all the organizations working on these issues do not believe that children should be involved in sex work, in the sex trade, in the sex industry, either by buying or selling sex. Sex work is an adult profession, and by adult we mean at 18 years and over, and children should no way be involved in that. I think what we have right now is a scenario where, because of poverty, there's a lot of pull factors to get into sex work. So you have to deal with the root causes for what they are. Some people will be driven to sex work because there aren't many other opportunities for them to earn a living, to earn an honest living. So if poverty is the issue, then we need to deal with poverty. And once there's poverty, and once there's socioeconomic marginalization and exclusion, some people will be driven to sex work. The other thing is that sex workers can't survive in the business of sex work if nobody is buying the sex, right?
Yeah.
So this
there's
is really
demand.
so there's demand as well. So let's look at that also. And society needs to turn itself on its face for its hypocrisy. Why all the stigma and the discrimination and the violence is being meted out to sex workers, but nobody says the same thing to the clients, who are mostly men, who are buying sex. Not only men, but mostly men who are buying sex. And this is the issues around where we see issues of gender inequalities particularly arise. So we have mostly women selling sex and trans women selling sex. A few gay men and a few straight men, which are smaller in numbers. But by and large, the sex industry and the sex trade is a demonstration of the gender inequalities that exist in society.
Yeah, I was shocked earlier because I was asking about your membership, and when I heard that there were male sex workers as well, and I didn't imagine that there were, and that there was also demand for that as well.
Yes, there male sex workers do exist, because we have a lot of young men who who women are buying sex from because it makes them feel younger. I should think women with money, they're buying sex from these young men. And as you know, we have a lot of young men coming out to school with all these CXC and all kinds of things, and they can't get a job, so they turn to the profession of sex work. And we have a lot of foreigners coming and going who, every time a different foreigner come, they change, right? But because men are so macho, people don't see it
Yeah.
as sex work that they're doing. They would say, "Oh, he get plenty of money, he get no foreign woman," but they're doing sex work because
Well,
they're
that's another
selling
that's
sex.
another issue with gender inequality, because if a woman, even if it's not sex work, if a woman decides that she wants to have 5 men, and the man does the same thing, the woman becomes I'm not sure if I'm allowed to call the word, but the man is a sweet man or a sweet boy. So that's
Right.
another issue with
Right.
the inequality of and the hypocrisy of our society that we live in.
Definitely, and it shows how we treat men and women differently, and judge men and women differently for the same kinds of behaviors. And I think all of that is written in a certain misogyny and a prejudice based on gender, which disproportionately affects women, including transgender women.
All right, I'm gonna give Quincy another chance to respond to this concern, and perhaps if Joel wanted to kick in, or any of you, the concern of how cross-dressing could affect children. I've heard people talk about that issue, about confusions that younger children could have when looking. I'm going to give you a chance to
I
respond to
don't
that.
think it's would cause no problem because to me, I know realizing my gender at a very early age that I'm different from my sibling. I know that my mother made 9 children. They were one girl, and there were 7 boys and 1 trans. And I always find myself doing things different from the rest. There were no confusion within me that knowing that I'm different from my brother.
No, I'm
And
talking about today, when a child sees somebody dressed differently, a trans, and could decide that this is mentally or what society has defined as a man, and sees the man appearing as a woman.
And that's
Because society, remember, you grew up a
Yeah,
certain
but-
way from very childhood. You tell them this boys were blue, girls were pink.
No,
and
but-
that's
whatever-
exactly the
But
problem.
Well, yes, I want
we have to
I
look
wanna
at society
give you a chance
different.
to respond.
Because when you look at society, the same society is going to put a program on television for an advertisement showing that nothing to laugh about and censored and male dressed in a female attire. So I think there's not much that children would follow the pattern. I think gender identity must not mix up with clothes you wear. Because whether your gender identity would always give you the right to express your gender, whatever clothes you wear wouldn't give you. The clothes is just not a big difference because I do take off my clothes, but I'm still appeared as a trans woman. I still express my gender as a trans woman. So clothes doesn't differentiate because you look at every day. If this want a show to put on at the culture center, and if it's not much about cross dressing, you don't get the crowd or the kick and the laugh about it.
Yeah. But Janelle, I
But
think
isn't
you
that
hit.
another problem too, Joel? Just before you start, the fact that it could be, it is seen as something to laugh about. Should it really be something to laugh about? The fact that, because you are real people who are affected by it, and the fact that we can put off a show without hitting at the producers for such a show, the fact that we could put off a show for people to come and laugh at it, they're not seeing this is funny. A man, it's not, there's nothing serious about it. It is funny. They're laughing at it and then they leave and that's it. They never really take it on. Isn't that another problem too? That could.
Well, that is to show you how the conflict of society. It's not a problem for a theater performance. If the theater want to perform such a show and it's sold out, but then it's something that builds for us. Because when they normally put on the show, they act in a kind of transphobia, a kind of trans way. Because they never would have put on a female clothes and just play a man role in the skit. They always act in a kind of way they related to some of the workplace that the trans people would be at night and those kind of efforts. So it always brings society to gain more to know what is about the trans that they don't get directly themselves from the trans people, or they don't get to interact much or get the trans people to become predominant to come out and perform those shows. So people always wanted to know, but just the hypocrisy of it, because You're living with a male, you're a female, you might be able to tolerate us on your show, but your male partner might asking you the next day why you had a trans person interviewing on your show. So they kind of injust. Some people might criticize you. It's a, on your behalf, I think it's one of the best show that I ever went on.
Thank you.
And forward in bringing out my gender identity or to the country or the nation at all, which and I would have liked to done it before or longer before than just ping me in the media and the spotlight. It's getting till you know about me, the community is knowing about me, the nation is knowing large by large is about me. But then some people are going to ask you the show, why did you tolerate such a person in your show?
It's a matter of human rights. I mean, it's not my place to judge anybody. That's their right to choose whatever they want. Isn't that what we've all stood up for?
And we
So,
should stand up for.
yeah.
I only wanted to jump
Yeah,
back at your
yeah.
original question about children. I think you hit the nail on the head in the question itself, and it's about how we frame things and what we teach people and what we teach children as well from a very early age. Society likes to put people in very discrete boxes, categories, and when it comes to gender, we've established a certain binary which reduces gender, which is a very diverse area, into just sex, that boy, male, girl, female, and that sort of thing. But it isn't that black and white. The reality, it isn't that black and white. There are some people who were born with both sex organs, a small minority of people. We refer to them as intersex people. Which part of the black and white binary you going to put them in? There's some people who were born with male sex organs, but psychologically, internally, they feel like women and they want to express that female gender. They don't fit in that binary of boy blue and girl pink, male boy and female girl that society has created. So we need to just kind of re-educate people about gender, that it's really not a binary. It's not just two categories and that's the end of it. There's all these other areas, there are all these other gray areas, and this wonderful diversity, this wonderful human diversity, that we just need to accept as a different model of gender, right? So I think once you teach people and you educate people, they learn. It's just that we're teaching people the wrong things.
Yeah, look, I will admit, an earlier part of my life, I think I was part of that very structure of society, but I have a 5-year-old son, and I have to, when we walk places or so on, I have to be very open with him. I was watching a TV show the other day, and there was this, an American TV show, and the scandal, and there was this couple, the chief of staff is gay, and he has his husband. And so the two of them were having a conversation. He doesn't watch it with me usually, but for some reason it grabbed his attention, and he says, "Mommy, is that his son?" Now, I could have lied and say that it's his son, but the fact of the matter is, this is reality, and he will have to face it at some point. Now, if I lied to him and I tell him something else, when he sees it, he wouldn't know how to deal with it. So I said, "No, it's his husband." And he looked at me very strangely, because that for him it's tremendous news. I mean, he doesn't know that a man can have a husband. And I said, well, some people do that, and in some countries it's normal for them to do that. And so he will sit down. Now, I would be criticized by many for doing that, but the point of the matter is it's reality.
Yeah.
And if we hide it, then our children will not know how to deal
Or
with
worse, they will go learn from their peers who might not come from that perspective of trying to educate them. So they go out and they learn from their peers what we shy away from talking to our kids in the home about, and they go and learn that, you're supposed to be violent towards those kinds of people. You're supposed to hit them. You're supposed to discriminate against them because that's wrong and it's sinful and it's all of these sorts of things. So I think it's very important. And thank you for doing that. That, you start to talk to our kids very early on about
lots of other
about
things
the
too, because
issues
it's
around
really
diversity.
important.
Yeah.
It's really
so
important.
Otherwise
because
they just
there's
learn it
issue
on
of race as well, because he is mixed, and he has this idea of color, skin color, and that sort of thing, because his father's Portuguese, so he doesn't look like me, right? So the thing is, all of these things we have to start teaching our children, because ultimately they will have to face them. And it's something that we all should do at home. We might have different beliefs about what is right or wrong, and we have the right to have those beliefs as well, just as much as any other person would have a right to feel however they feel. And I think that we should respect each other regardless of our beliefs. And at the end of the day, then that's what matters, because I'm not going to impose my rights on my beliefs on you. And I think that's what human rights is about. as free to be whatever we
Not
want to be, as long as we
infringe
don't
upon
infringe on
somebody's
somebody else's right.
Exactly.
And so I think once we have that understanding, each of us, regardless of what side we on or what we believe in, we shouldn't have much of a problem in society.
Equal rights and dignity for all.
Yeah.
I think when it look locally back in Guyana, it's a norm. It's this big taboo and norm. But people, strangely, when they go abroad and they go into society, they fall to suit. Because I could remember last year I was in Washington. I went over to the It's 2012 conference and going by my aunt, and where she lives, it's Eastern Avenue, and they normally has a gay parade. Me and her never had a conversation about my lifestyle. And the first question she asked her daughter, Lavana, Quincy come the wrong time, the parade finished already? And I was like, what parade? And she was like, they normally have a gay parade passed around this road. So it was very strange to me that she brings such a conversation to me, because back home here we never had this conversation. We have never discussed the role of this. And for she to tell me about a gay parade, she didn't tell me about a fair or a party where macho men would have gone to. She was telling me about the gay parade would pass along the street. The other thing that grabbed me attention with her, it's New York is such a busy area. We were in the area called Chinatown, and we stand in the street, was very busy, packed. And I could have seen a gay man coming, and the body language of the person. So I done saw the person, looked away. She now stared at the person, then looked at me in a way that full understanding if I observe the person. But I don't turn my face. But those are the kind of people who back home would tell you all sort of things and criticize you in this country. And you see it all the time you travel. Guyanese people, when they're home, they make a taboo about gay people. And when they go there abroad, they appreciate and tolerate those set of people.
I think people learn to expand their perspectives, and that could only come with exposure and education. Travel is one way for it to happen, but I think your efforts today, like bringing these taboo, quote unquote, taboo issues into the public domain, is also a very important part of that. Quincy talked about this being, one of the first interviews he's done locally, which doesn't just shine a minor spotlight on a specific incident that might have affected the trans community, but allows somebody to discuss their personal experiences. And I think that's what more people need to hear to kind of change hearts and minds. They need to hear the human side of what people go through. And I think any reasonable, right-thinking person could listen, after listening to the kinds of discrimination that Miriam talked about, that sex workers face, that Quincy talked about, that transgender people, including sex workers in particular, face. And even if you're not completely won over and accept sex work or transgender identities, you must be able to appreciate that the discrimination and the violence and the exclusion is wrong, and it shouldn't be taking place. And in order to change that, we need to change people's views, we need to educate people, we need to educate the public, and we need to change the legal and policy environment as well. Because as long as that remains, then state bodies, state agencies, police and others, people who work for state services, can perpetuate their own biases and prejudices that they have.
All right. He has summed it up quite nicely. I'm going to give you a chance to wrap up, give your closing remarks.
I just want persons out there to understand that sex work is work, and sex workers wants to be accepted into society as a human being and not just as something or as the person. Sex workers want to be accepted as human being, and we want people to understand that sex work is work, so we're fighting hard for decriminalization of this profession.
For me, I would like to wake up a morning and see we stop being tolerated, and to be more appreciated for you as human being. You must wake up a morning and say, okay, we belongs as Guyanese, we belongs, and to this country, we need to work together to make our contribution as any normal person and be equality.
Janelle, the announcement for your viewers in particular, they could come out and demonstrate their support for everybody's human rights. Sunday, the 9th of February, there is a walk for equality being hosted by the Guyana Equality Forum, which is a civil society body made up of many of the organizations here and many others. It starts at 3 p.m. at the parade ground, moves off at 3:15. The first 100 persons get free T-shirts, and then there's a rally immediately after at the parade ground. The theme is No to Violence, and we're talking about all forms of violence. Police brutality, the police abuses that have been happening, the domestic violence, violence against sex workers, violence against trans people, lesbian, gay, and bisexual. The deaths of police officers, many police officers being killed in the line of duty. The society has just become totally violent. So this is a march. We're hoping to have more than 1,000 people strong on the road on Sunday, February 9th. So we're just encouraging members of the public to come out for the Walk for Equality and say no to violence. And then there'll be a big rally after at the parade ground as well.
All right. Well, there you have it. Come out and support the Walk of Violence. Now, these are things that I think too often we as Guyanese, we don't really show our support for things that don't directly affect us. But I believe that the human capital is one of the most important resources that a country could have. And when people are dying and when people are being abused, then it's important for all of us at some point to really come out. I mean, there's no way that you could just sit by and say, how could you not want to do something? And I know sometimes many of us are busy with our work and trying to make a living, but sometimes we need to find some way to show support. And in numbers, when there are numbers, people really see and make a change and make that change. Now, as it relates to the issue of sex work, I think the most important part of it all has to do with respect, respect for each other, regardless of our choices. I'm a Christian, and I have my beliefs, but at no point will I ever impose those on anybody. And so I believe, and I feel the same way about others who have their choice, as long as they don't impose that on me. And I think respect is the bottom line. And we learn to respect each other, and we are placed here and we have to live together. And that's what we ought to do. So I encourage you at home to understand, and you've heard the stories and understand. And I think the most troubling of the issues are the discrimination and the stigma. And these are human beings like everyone else who deserve to be treated enjoy the same services that we have enjoyed at school and at the healthcare system and at the police station, and so they need our support. This is something that we should all support. This has been the Round Table. I'm Janelle Persaud. Goodbye.